Hello, I'm Dr. Michael Kessler, and I want to welcome you to the Master HeartQuest Professional Part 1 series. This is a very important series because we're going to go over the basics that you need to be able to read the HeartQuest Professional and understand it. With that said, let's go to the disclaimer.
The HeartQuest Professional is not intended to replace the services or medical advice of a licensed healthcare practitioner, nor is it meant to encourage diagnosis or treatment of disease. It is for research and education only. Any applications or suggestions set forth in the HeartQuest Professional or this training are solely at the discretion and risk of the health provider. Implementation or experimentation with any supplements, herbs, dietary changes, medication and or lifestyle changes, including neurovisor, etc., are done so at your own risk and responsibility. It is important that you work within the scope of your professional license and state laws. Reproduction of these slides or the information on them on the internet or social media is prohibited without permission from Dr. Michael Kessler.
Thank you, Dr. Bicchetti. So here we have the new HeartQuest Professional. And what this is that the old system that some of you have to plug it in overnight, right? This one, you don't have to do that. There's a battery in the back, and it's a lot easier to use. These are some of the screens we're going to be going over, and these screens are the main screens dealing with heart rate variability as seen in the HeartQuest Professional, and it's really important that you understand this.
Okay, this is the new HeartQuest Professional system. So what's important to know here is that the wrist clamps could be any color at all. The important thing is that those little plastic leads, colored sleeves on the end of the wires, are what you need to know that the right one is the red one and the green one is going on the left wrist. And so they can go into either clamp color. It's just important that the lead colors, those plastic sleeves, go into the correct wrists. So this unit, along with your laptop and our portal, which is on Google Chrome, either on a PC or a Mac computer, is what you'll need.
Thank you, Dr. Bicchetti. That's really important. And with that said, who the heck are we and what are we about? Okay. So this is our team. And that's me, Dr. Michael Kessler. And there it is, Dr. Sandra Bicchetti. And we've been in practice for about 40 years, doing chiropractic, kinesiology, doing lab work, doing functional genomics, heavy on the functional genetics, and a lot more, because we'll do whatever we have to do to get our patients well, just like most of you out there. And on the right side there, you have Dr. Javdat Karimov, NMD. Now, this doctor was an anesthesiologist in Russia, came here and got his NMD here in Portland, Oregon, where he is still in practice as well. So all of us are still in practice, which is a good thing for you because we try and figure things out and implement them into our technology, the HeartQuest Professional. And then we have Sean Hoover, who's our CTO of the HeartQuest, co-owner of another company we have called NeuroWiser, which you'll see on the website a lot of information on the NeuroVisor and some videos for you to watch, which is a fantastic technology to help dehabituate these brains of our patients who have been wired and have had anxiety and stress their whole life, and that's how their brain is functioning. So we want to dehabituate that. We want to change that. We want to help them sleep. We want to help them focus. We want whatever it is that we need to do as far as the brain goes. That is an amazing, amazing technology. So we have that. And then last but not least is Ruin Denecker. He's one of our co-founders, one of our partners, and he's a software engineer, and he's an amazing software engineer, by the way. And with that said, here we go. So it says here, become a better health detective. So, it says add HeartQuest Professional to your practice, complement the tools you already use. So what we're looking at here is having an objective tool to be able to track our patients and show them that we're moving them in the right direction. No matter how we practice, we want to be able to engage our patients, show them that what we're doing is actually doing something and working, hopefully, right? Moving them again in the right direction. So here we go. How does this all work? Well, there are two components here of heart rate variability, or the HeartQuest Professional. And this says where science meets clinical intelligence. On the left side, where you see the little heart, you see the little electrocardiogram signal there, the ECG. We get an ECG. It takes 5 minutes. Gives us the information we need for heart rate variability, how well the nervous system is able to adapt and change. We break that down into its individual frequency band components that give us information about very specific physiology. We'll talk about that. That's current science today. What's different is how we convert that into the ancient wisdom of the meridians, the 5 elements in Ayurvedic medicine. So we don't replace either system, we connect them with measurable physiology. It's all one system. So there we go. We're connecting all the dots as far as Western and Eastern medicine and putting it all together. So what are we measuring here? We're getting an ECG and we're measuring the intervals between one R wave to the next for 5 minutes. And you can see below there, it's like 812 milliseconds, 745 milliseconds. We want to see variability. We don't want to see a metronome where the time is the same. We want that flexibility, adaptability, which that reflects, because what is controlling that time domain there is the autonomic nervous system, switching between sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system function to give us those changes. We don't want to be stuck in one parameter or one part of the nervous system or the other. We need that flow, that flexibility. Hence, we have variability and adaptability. Really important. So the technology, when we talk about HeartQuest Professional, is going to calculate that flexibility, that variability, into something very specific called the RMSSD that will tell us about heart rate variability. And that has to do with recovery and repair. So RMSSD reflects parasympathetic vagal activity, how well the body can recover, restore, and heal. How well can the body recover? Really important, especially after a stressful situation. We want to bounce back out of that situation, that stress situation, and have the body repair and recover, right? That's your parasympathetic. That's your RMSSD. The other huge parameter, the gold standard in heart rate variability, the great prognosticator, which you'll see in PubMed if you punch in SDNN and any particular condition, the higher that number, the more robust that person's nervous system is to be able to offset the stressors, right? So SDNN reflects overall autonomic nervous system capacity, the foundation of resilience, adaptation, and health. So when we're working with our patients, we want to see that number coming up. So how well can the body adapt, recover, and thrive, right? So that's the time domain. 2 numbers in the time domain, SDNN, RMSSD. And this is pretty much the same thing. And again, I said the higher the RMSSD and the higher the SDNN, the better that patient's going to be. The second component of the HeartQuest Professional is the frequency domain, which is still in the scientific literature. So what we're talking about here is we're going to break the cardio signal, the ECG signal, down into its individual frequency band components that represent certain parameters that we see in the HeartQuest. It's like shining a white light through a prism, and we break that frequency up into many different colors representing those different frequencies, right? We do the same in the HeartQuest Professional. And we use a formula called fast Fourier transform. That's a mathematical formula in science to break that ECG signal down into very low frequency that you see in the circle there, LF, which is low frequency, and HF, which is high frequency. And they all have very specific characteristics that we're going to go over today. And the combination of all those together is your total power. Total power is going to be really important because if total power is low, we're going to have trouble adapting and shifting and changing within those parameters there that we're going to talk about. Sometimes we can equate that with mitochondria. Sometimes we can equate that with qi if we're talking about Chinese medicine. But we want to have adequate total power. And we'll talk about that. And this all reflects into the autonomic nervous system, the master regulator of the body. So on the parasympathetic side, we have rest, recover, repair. That's where we lower the heart rate. We improve our digestion when that's working properly because it's involved in what? Peristalsis, moving our food down. It's also involved with the brain-gut connection. It's that two-way street there. And it's highly involved in reducing inflammation because the vagus nerve, we're talking about within that parasympathetic is the vagus nerve to do all these wonderful things for us. And we'll be able to see that very clearly in the HeartQuest Professional, what that vagus nerve is doing. So we're talking about calm, connect, and restore. Very important there. On the other side, we have the sympathetic nervous system. It says act, adapt, and perform. So that's what kicks in when we are in a stressful state. And from the past, when a predator was chasing us, for us to survive or even have a chance to survive, we better prepare. The physiology has to change so we can run and get that blood going to improve circulation and get the oxygen and the nutrients to our muscles. We have to our pupils have to dilate so we can see all around and have that peripheral vision. Thyroxine is released so we increase our metabolism. And there's a lot more that goes on, but all those things are important so we can survive. And so even today, it may not be a predator chasing. This is probably not. It's going to be IRS coming to visit us or something like that that engages that sympathetic nervous system. The key is that we don't stay in that mode. If we're stuck in sympathetic dominance, we are going to have some issues because stress, they always say stress kills, but stress creates chronic stress. We're talking about chronic stress is going to create a lot of issues for us. So again, we want to increase heart rate there, mobilize energy. We want to focus, be alert, and protect. We're in that mode, okay? And we want to know if somebody's stuck in that mode. Either one is not going to be good for you if you're stuck in one and you can't dance back and forth as needed, right? So here's the frequencies that we're talking about, the three different messages, right? LF. When we see LF, we're talking about the stress response. How strongly your body reacts to change and demand. Higher or more stress response. So that's a big number to see. We're going to learn that LF has a lot to do with compensating for something called the barrel reflex that regulates blood pressure. And when that's not working well, the autonomic nervous system, specifically the LF, has to go in and compensate for that. And that's going to tell us a lot about their cardiovascular health in conjunction with some other things that we're going to measure, which will probably be in the next episode. HF, again, that's your recovery and balance. How well your body recovers, relaxes, and stays in balance. Higher is better there, right? That's your, and these colors mean something. The LF on the HeartQuest Professional, that's your yellow pie, and the HF is going to be your green pie, and the VLF is your red pie. Now, if the LF is a predominant percentage of the pie, and the HF is very low percentage, that person's in fight or flight. Okay? VLF, very low frequency. That is very important because in our most chronically unhealthy individuals, most of them will be mostly red in that pie. That's your long-term chronic stress load. And it is the HPA axis we're talking about there. We're producing lots of cortisol. And a lot of times we're also dealing there with the limbic system, where we store all the emotional baggage, and we don't know sometimes why we respond a certain way because somebody with red shoes beat us up when we were a little kid, and now we're in a coffee shop, we see red shoes, we don't know why we're going into this fight or flight reaction. The body's it's trying to protect us, and it's not rational. It bypasses our rational brain and just puts us into that stress mode, and that's the limbic system. And there's the VLF. Is part of that is that limbic system. So these are the three frequencies, the three perspectives, one clear picture of health right here. And we could even break those frequencies down into these parameters. We're linking HRV frequency domains to doshas, elements, hormones, and neurotransmitters. And this is some of the work from Dr. Karamov. So when we look at that pie that we were talking about, and we're looking at the red pie, that also will represent certain elements in Chinese medicine, the water element, the metal element. And the yellow pie would represent the wood element and the fire element. And the green pie, which is your high frequency range, represents the earth and the fire minister. And within those, there's very specific neurotransmitters, minerals, hormones that are indications. And we're going to get into Chinese medicine at some point for those who want to learn that and be able to use that for us non-TCM practitioners. But you'll gain some very specific functional medicine type information when we look at these guys, okay? And we're going to be going deeper and deeper down that rabbit hole as we progress, okay? And here it is again. So the VLF, water element, metal element, and that is the Vata dosha, which we'll get into as well. Very important. Even if you don't do Ayurvedic, it's going to tell you very specific characteristics of your patient and what kind of tendencies for specific issues that they may have, and what things would help them become more balanced to avoid some of the inherent problems that can occur when they're out of balance in that particular dosha. And there is the wood element, which is the Pitta dosha, which again has to do with relationships to the wood element, to the fire element. We're going to get into that at some point. The earth element, which is in the high frequency range, the green part of the pie, and that's going to tell us a lot of information about the Kapha dosha. Same with the fire minister. And we're going to show you cases so you can relate to some of these things, even if that's not part of your practice. So here we go, HQP parameters. Here's the time domain in the stress and dealing with stress. And that would be your SDNN. The normal range is right there. And what does it mean? Overall variability and adaptability. That is the gold standard, like I said, to be able to adapt and change when change is necessary. And that, dealing with the autonomic nervous system as it goes out to all your organs and glands to make shifts and changes as needed based on your environment. And when you have a high SDN, that means your nervous system is resilient and again can change when change is necessary. So when it's low, your autonomic nervous system is not working as well as it should, and so you have some dysfunction there. And that's a risk factor because we need to be able to change when change is necessary. and we're going to go into more depth on some of these things later on. Here's your RMSSD. And again, that's your parasympathetic nervous system, which houses the vagus nerve. And so we want to have that robust enough because that vagus nerve, we talk about how important it is. In this world today, where a lot of pathogens are floating around in this environment here, and COVID was a big issue, and people were having these major inflammatory storms and cytokine storms, we have a mechanism. One of the mechanisms is the vagus nerve. It connects to the immune system and actually lowers some of those cytokines like tumor necrosis factor alpha through something called the cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway. So when we see on the HeartQuest that there's not a lot of tone there, it's a good idea to do something. Maybe the neural visor and vagal electrical stimulation may be a good idea. Okay. The stress index, just like it says, sympathetic activation load, fight or flight, sympathetic dominance, and it's low. Sometimes it's equated with, just kind of an exhausted adrenal fatigue type of state, right? Total power, you have to view everything you do through the total power, because if the total power is low, then it's going to affect their ability to adapt. They don't have the energy to adapt. So the meaning is overall autonomic nervous system energy, high good adaptability, low autonomic exhaustion. Okay. LF to HF ratio, used a lot in heart rate variability. I'm not really that fond of it because the LF is not just sympathetic nervous system function. It's both. It's both parasympathetic and sympathetic. And the range is 1 to 3. When it's over 3, it's more sympathetic dominant. When it's lower, it's more parasympathetic dominant. And the LF, as we're going to learn, is a big deal because knowing what that's doing and something called pulse pressure will help us to save some lives and be able to act very early on before people have different cardiovascular, one of them being stiff arteries that can lead to a lot of cardiovascular issues. It's a risk factor, and we want to catch it early on. That's basically what I'm saying here. And the HF is, again, the range, when you look at the pie, about 20 to 40%. And again, that's giving us a really good indication of the parasympathetic nervous system power, strong vagal activity when it's high, which we want. When it's low, parasympathetic nervous system withdrawal. Very low frequency, that's kind of the range there, and the meaning, slow regulation. Why do I say slow regulation? Because the autonomic nervous system, which is made up of that LF and the HF, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, that's fast speed internet. That's just, things happen very quickly because we have to have things happen very quickly to regulate and change that physiology. But when the VLF is your HPA axis, which is a slower process to regulate the body. So it's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and we have to put a lot of the, whether there's ACTH and all the different hormones into the bloodstream to regulate its slow process, right? And then we finally go and implement the cortisol release at the adrenal glands. And again, it's snail mail, and it takes a lot of energy. VLF takes up a lot of energy. That's basically where I'm going with that. And when we look at it, it's involved with the central nervous system. It's also involved a little bit with blood pressure regulation through the renin-angiotensin system. It has a lot of function. And again, I mentioned that it's highly involved with the brain, as far as the part of the brain, which is the limbic system, where we house this emotional baggage from the past, right? And so we have different ways to work with that, and we'll be talking about that in future modules. And the neurovisor is one of those that can help that. When it's high, a lot of times there's emotional stress, there's chronic imbalance. We also see it a lot of times with inflammation and metabolic syndrome. So the VLF is the one that you're going to see in most of your chronically stressed patients. The LF, again, we will talk a lot about the LF because it's involved with the baroreflex activity, the blood pressure regulation. And we're going to combine that number, with something called the PP, which is going to be where we measure the blood pressure, and the difference between systolic and diastolic is going to give us a number. We'll show you what those ranges are, and that will tell us if the arteries are becoming stiff. And we're going to go into some depth on that because we have some amazing things we can do and why that's happening in the first place. So baroreceptor loop, overactive, stress, anxiety, hypertension risk, all these things tied in to the LF. And when it's weak, sometimes we have a weak baroreflex, poor adaptability, dysautonomia. When somebody gets up out of the chair, they get a little dizzy, they have orthostatic hypotension, those kind of things. It's a possibility. So LF, stress response and blood pressure control, responding to demand plus maintaining blood pressure. So the LF has a lot going on here. High LF plus high total power, strong response, systems adapting. High LF and low total power, system strain, adrenal involvement. High LF plus low HF, sympathetic dominance. So you always look at the LF in relationship, which is the yellow pie you see right there, in relationship to the green pie. And if there's not a lot of green there, they're probably right smack in sympathetic fight or flight, okay? Key physiology here reflects also the baroreceptor activity, blood pressure regulation. Acts as the great compensator when blood pressure control needs help. Interpret LF in context with HF, like we said, because if the HF is low, then it's usually going to be fight or flight, and look at it in relationship to total power. But the big one, when you see a big yellow pie like that, and you measure their blood pressure, and you measure their pulse pressure, and they have a huge gap, maybe 60 millimeters mercury, that person's arteries are starting to become very stiff. And we have a whole, like I said, a whole module just on that. When we look at heart HF, HF is recovery and parasympathetic control. Again, repair, relax, restore. We've been talking about that. There's several things that we have to discuss here because just because you have a green pie, it doesn't tell us the whole picture until we look at it in context to everything else. So if you have a high HF, big green pie like that, and you have low total power, that's kind of burnout, like that toaster there. They're kind of in an exhausted state, right? If you have, and this is really, really important, high HF plus rejections. So you're going to look on the cardio screen there on your HeartQuest Professional, and you're going to look for rejections. If it's over 20 and you have a big green pie like that, possible arrhythmia pattern, like that heart right there we see in front of us, kind of pumping out of balance there, okay? The other thing, if you have high total power and you have a big green pie like that, is that gal doing karate on the side there. Young athletes have usually that particular picture where they can recover and they have really good parasympathetic activity, which we need. And we'll see that in these younger people and in athletes. And then that pretty much is it. It also reflects the vagus nerve. And so we want to have enough green there. And usually that's, again, a reflection of all the things that we just talked about dealing with the vagus nerve and why that's so important. Okay? So again, it could be really good. You're not to have the green pie if your total power is high. If it's low, you're kind of in an exhausted state and you're kind of burnt out, right? And if you have a lot of rejections, you'll probably see that big HF there, and that person's probably going to have some arrhythmias. So in general, HF equal recovery signal, interpret with total power. Always interpret it with total power. And here's your VLF. VLF is the stress load and central nervous system influence there. Okay, remember the HPA axis, deep regulation, chronic load. So if somebody's been in stress for a long time, it'd probably be like that pie you see right there in the middle, very little of everything else, and you got that big VLF there. So high VLF, chronic stress load, emotional, neurological burden. Higher VLF, greater stress burden, not better function. And I have the sugar guy there, with the sugar pouring the sugar in the pot there, because you will see this sometimes with metabolic, insulin resistance and a lot of those things, because you got to have inflammation. What does inflammation do to the receptors? So the hormones don't work as well. Instead of giving more hormones, sometimes we want to fix those receptors. And VLF is kind of part of that type of physiology. That's why I have the fire there. Key physiology reflects central nervous system influence associated with the HPA axis load, often tied to long-term stress patterns, reduce the load before performance. So it's one of the things you want to start to work on. And we're going to lay this out for you in the next module. How do you work through all these parameters in an orderly way that makes sense to you? So VLL, very low frequency, is how much load the system is carrying. So this is quite a lot right here. But we're going to be brief on this just to give you a little bit, again, because it's worth repeating, low autonomic nervous system resilience. So that's going to be what? Your SDNN. So your body has less ability to adapt, recover, and withstand stress if that SDNN is low. Reduced adaptability, decreased resilience to stress, impaired recovery and repair. Below that, you'll see some of the suggestions from Neurovisor, some solutions to restore, rebuild, and regulate. Okay. Number 2, sympathetic dominance. That's your LF. Stress response locked on because the HF, remember, the green pie is low and the LF is high, so you want to look at it in relationship. Those are the 2 time domain parameters. Excuse me, that's one of them is the RMSD, which is right there, reduced recovery signal. You kind of look at them together. Persistent stress activation, elevated cortisol and adrenaline, performance over recovery, poor sleep, tension, anxiety. So anyway, it's just sympathetic stress, right? So what this means, your body is stuck in fight or flight mode with limited recovery. The Neurovisor solutions right down below for you, and we're going to go into more depth on that. And I would highly recommend you watch the series on the Neurovisor. I think it's really good because what do you have in your toolkit to be able to help somebody to break some of these patterns that have been chronic their whole life? The Neurovisor, right? Elevated VLF, very low frequency. High VLF, central nervous system influence. And we're talking about what this means. Your CNS is under high emotional and physiological pressure. And it says stored stress and trauma patterns, emotional overload, neurological and chronic conditions, limbic system driving physiology. So all the stuff we talked about, Neurovisor solutions right there. And then we have reduced parasympathetic activity, low RMSSD, low HF percent. And that's going to affect that vagus nerve again. What this means, your body is not recovering and repairing effectively. Impaired vagal tone, poor recovery and repair, disrupted sleep and digestion, reduced regenerative capacity. And there we have The high stress index, high sympathetic load, elevated sympathetic pressure, high cardiovascular strain, reduced adaptability under stress, anxiety, overwhelm, burnout, increased inflammation risk. So your system is under high pressure and struggling to cope. So we want to reduce the load, improve variability, and restore balance. And there are some of the NeuroVisor solutions there. And here we have pattern recognition. We want to look at the whole picture. We want to look at all these together, and we're going to teach you how to do that, okay? So total power, again, I'm mentioning these things several times because this is the most important aspect of the HeartQuest Professional. These are the scientific numbers in the medical literature that tell us the important aspects of how well we can change and adapt. Because when we can't do that, that's when health takes a nosedive. Total power, overall adaptability, energy available, high adaptability, low depleted limited reserve, stress index, current stress activation level, high sustained stress load. Use it with the LF plus the pulse pressure, and it will tell you also about, we're talking about the arteries when they become more like a pipe and stiff and lost their flexibility. SDNN, overall variability signal, low, reduced adaptability, global autonomic nervous system flexibility marker. RMSSD, recovery, vagal signal. So we can't be stuck in fight or flight. We have to be able to shift. We have to be able to recover. Low, poor parasympathetic recovery. Use with HF plus total power. Look at it together. Gives you kind of information. Now, the time domain and the frequency domain are two different parameters that we're looking at. Apples and oranges. They don't always match, but we're going to go through that and show you again how to look at it. Do not read one number. You got to look at the whole pattern. See the pattern and guide the direction. I want to thank you for listening today. And this is something you might want to watch again. And I hope this will help you when you look at your HeartQuest Professional readings. Thank you.